Hello, my friends. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Christ and Coffee podcast, bringing the church together one coffee hour at a time. Today we have Dr. Anna Shanazari joining the program to talk all things pastor kids related. She's a pastor kid herself. She has done research on this topic, and she's joining the program to discuss what is it like to be a person growing up in a ministry family. So, Dr. Anna, so good to see you. How are you doing?
Hi, very good. Anna's fine, but thank you.
Okay, Anna. Pleasure. And
great to see you.
congratulations, you just got engaged not too long ago.
Yes, so excited. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for joining the program.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
Do you feel like as a pastor's kid, you feel like pressured to be on this podcast because it's ministry and it's part of the
What a
journey
great question.
of you have to say yes to anything church related?
No, honestly, I was really excited.
Okay, good.
Is it weird to say I didn't see it as a church-related thing?
No,
I
actually, that's kind of what we're going for. Organic,
Yeah.
non-produced
Yeah.
coffee and the conversations.
No, I was really excited to be asked. A bit nervous for sure, but
This
excited.
is your first podcast?
Definitely my first podcast, so.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll be great.
Thank you. Yeah.
So yeah, let's hear about your story first. What was your upbringing like? Your dad is a pastor, a great guy, a good friend. So tell us your story. What was your spiritual upbringing like?
Yeah. So, yeah, I grew up in the church. My mom's dad was also a pastor. So, like, our family grew up in the church. So, I was born in Iran. And when I was 2.5, we moved to Lebanon. So, both my parents went to Near East School of Theology for their MDivs. So.
Shout out to the Near East School of Theology.
Yeah. So I was there for about 4 years, and then we went back to Iran until I was in 7th grade. After that, moved to the U.S. So yeah, my dad was ordained when we went back to Iran. Since then, I've been a PK, but even in Lebanon, he was in ministry.
Got it. And you mentioned your grandfather and knowing your story. Can you tell us about him? Because this is generational ministry family here.
Yeah, of course. So my grandpa was the pastor of the church that my dad ended up serving at after he became ordained. He had a passion for helping people. He actually, this is stories I've heard.
Did you get a chance to meet him, or?
So no, he was martyred 2 days before I was born.
Wow.
So is a big part of, I think, the story I grew up with is so he was a pastor, and in 1994 the Iranian government was going after pastors. About 7 pastors were martyred that year, 2 of them Armenian, one including my grandpa. The rest were Iranian pastors, I think, and Assyrian, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, he passed away, or they were trying to find him. He was missing for some time, for days, and they found him when my mom went to the hospital to give birth to me.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, all my baby photos, there's like flowers with black ribbons on it because it's from my grandpa's funeral. Grandma's wearing black, family's wearing black, but I grew up with my grandma, my mom always reminding me, you're the joy we needed in that time. So no pressure, but
I'm sure as a doctor in psychology,
right, like, that was really sweet, but I wonder what that did
has set
to
the trajectory of your entire research.
So, but yeah, I really wish I met him because he sounds like an intellectual, loved to read, write, translated a ton of books, loved philosophy, and just, would read about other religions just to not follow Christianity, to follow
a well-rounded individual and aware of the world's beliefs.
These are the things I've heard, so I really wish I met him, but I didn't get to.
Right. But you're honoring his legacy by
Yeah.
continuing the family ministry and
Yeah.
in different avenues. And so you grew up in Iran. Uh, you were spent a little time in the Middle East, and then you came
Mhm.
Lebanon. Then you came to Burbank, LA area.
Yeah, so moved to Burbank when I was 13 years old, 8th
What
grade.
was that like? Because that must have been culture shock. And
Huge culture shock.
okay.
Huge. Sorry. It's the first, this is just so funny, but the first day I walked into school is John Muir Middle School. And let me paint the picture. In
I
Iran,
mean, middle school is just awkward and
and
nervous.
I'm 13
to
years
begin
old,
with.
like
Okay.
8th grade student.
Okay.
And I look really awkward because, like, straight out of Iran, like, I don't know how people dress like here,
Right.
you know. So it's a very awkward time in my life. And I walk in. Now, backstory in Iran, our schools are we have girls' schools and then boys' schools. So females, my school was all girls. And so I had grown up like that, except for Lebanon. The only time we had interactions with other boys our age was church, and camps and things like that. So I enter school, John Muir Middle School, 8th grade, and it's the first day of school, so people haven't seen each other for months. And I'm seeing, like, girls running and jumping and hugging guys. Everybody's wearing short shorts, and, like, I'm like, what is happening? What is this? I was just so confused and shocked, and it's something so normal.
Right.
It just, to me, was like, what do I do here? So, yeah, definitely tough. I did a lot of crying that year.
Of course.
But also, it wasn't all bad because I remember getting so excited about how school was ran. Like, I remember clearly history class. We were trying to learn about, United States history was 8th grade. And our teacher would always try to incorporate, like, role plays and things like that to help us understand what was happening. Like, one day I remember we organized our desks a certain way to simulate, like, a factory, and then we were all factory workers trying to, So I would come home like, Mom, guess what we did today? Like, we actually practiced what it would look like to blah, blah, blah. And whereas in Iran, a lot of times I was just memorizing everything. So school was exciting for me. So it wasn't all bad. I was also very excited.
How was your English? You speak Farsi, Armenian, English?
So in Iran, yeah. So in Iran, I would say reading, writing, Farsi came easiest to me because that's what I did school in. And then Armenian. Spoken, I would say Armenian was my number one, my primary language. English, I had started learning in Iran. I took lessons from a woman who was actually American who had moved.
So you got the American English, not the, like, British proper English. That's great.
Exactly. So I got the American English grammar, but you learn proper grammar. So my grammar was pretty good, but
Americans
language,
don't speak in grammar. No, not at all.
So I still catch, like, idioms that I'm like, huh? What?
What? Yeah.
So I'll still have moments like that after 15 years now.
But there was this love for learning at an early age.
Yes.
And it kind of led you down this trajectory of continuing to get your master's and then your doctorate.
I remember as a kid, I loved books. I would, like, have my mom sit next to me and read books. I've always just loved books and learning. I'd always ask questions. So even moving here, I think, school just excited me. And I loved that I was not only allowed to, but encouraged to ask questions. That was a big thing for me entering the US. And then also Fuller, my grad school. I would say that was one of the things I loved so much about Fuller was the ability to ask anything and everything and not be judged for it or, like, valid. Let's talk about it,
Yeah. That's what higher education or education should be about, honest conversations and dialogues. And so what was it like growing up in the church in America? Was it different than Iran?
Ooh, all the good questions. Yes. Oof, so much. Okay. Just caveat, I was a kid there, so I didn't know about, like, the church politics or anything like that. So it was very ideal for me,
Right.
in my memory, right? I don't know if I'm gonna press some buttons here, but I think one of the main things one of the main differences here that I noticed was role of women in ministry. I would say here I saw, especially amongst like conservative evangelical groups, Armenian churches as well, women preaching absolute no, and to me that was surprising.
Because in Iran, the place where
Which
head
is
coverings,
which is known to be oppressive towards women, that we had women preaching and teaching, and word of God is the word of God.
so in the church setting there, women had more freedoms, but societally less so. But here, societally a lot of
Right,
freedoms,
right.
but within your
our
context.
circles, yeah. I will say our ordained pastors in the Armenian church were still males.
Right.
But in terms of preaching in general, that's one thing. Other things, again, I grew up in a very small evangelical Armenian church, organ, hymns from the El Majan. And then here the church I went to, which was great. I loved the freedom there. But at first it was surprising to me. There's like drums and lights and like all these like microphones, sound system, everything. Everyone's clapping and raising their hands. I didn't grow up in a charismatic church. So to me, all of that was a culture shock.
Okay.
Over the years, there's been it's hard to theologically compare the two, I would say, because again, I was a kid back then, so I wasn't engaging in theological conversations.
Okay.
But in terms of first reactions, I remember those
two things: the music, the wow, that's a lot of fascinating insights, and I think you would assume the opposite culturally, but then that's the beauty and the craziness of culture, and then the subculture within cultures, that you can't assume things all the time.
Right.
And each church experience will be different for different people.
Oh, absolutely. And even Iran, I'm sure, let's say
there's different
Persian,
there's different types of
denominations
and theologies with different expressions. So then you have this love for learning, you're getting adapted to the life of America. You have a passion to do psychology. Is that what you do for undergrad?
Yes, I did. Everyone asked me, when did you decide to do psychology? 9th grade, we had health and career class in Burbank High School.
Okay.
And for some reason, the chapter on psychology and psychiatry caught my attention. So I decided to take AP Psych. Shout out to my AP Psych teacher. He was awesome. Loved it. Decided to do psych at UCLA.
Okay.
I think every single class I took there, I just loved psychology more and more. I was fascinated by the human mind, by behavior. And then, it wasn't even a second thought. I just wanted to go to grad school after.
This is my passion. This is the topic that interests me.
Which is very odd because I'm a very indecisive person. So.
But this is like clear as day calling.
Yeah. I will say there are some days that are hard at work currently in practice. I'm like, why did I decide this?
Yeah. But that's as long as you love it enough, that's success.
No,
yeah.
But I loved it so much. Yeah.
So then your dissertation topic when you went to your master's and was on the topic of pastor kids.
Yeah. So I went to Fuller for both master's and PhD. Did MA in psychology, theology, and then also clinical psych PhD. So the lab that I was in, my professor, Dr. Kenneth Wong, one of his focuses in research is perfectionism.
Okay.
So I was plugged into that lab and very fascinated with the topic. During my first year, I believe it was, initially I thought I was going to do something with like Armenians and, culture related.
I mean, perfectionism.
That would have definitely done a lot there. So I was starting to like do my write-ups, literature review and everything. And then in one of our classes, it was a developmental psych class, and the professor started talking about, okay, like let's look at how this, how this looks like in pastoral families and the pressure of the congregation and things like that. So me and one of my friends in the class who's also a PK, we kind of looked at each other after class. We're like, wait, what if we collect data on PKs and perfectionism? And we literally emailed Dr. Wong. We're like, Dr. Wong, we want to meet with you. We have an idea for research. So he was totally up for it. We started, creating the survey and gathering data, and 7 years later
of research.
Right.
Okay. So you did the topic ended up becoming PKs and the concept of perfectionism.
Right.
So like just practically talk about it. So like I have 2 young boys. This topic is very dear to my heart, and knowing that a lot of the pastor kids usually are like the 2 stories of like complete rebel or saint. There seems to be like no in between. Or if it's like rebel, then they had the conversion and now they're taking their father's mega church and now they're doing the ministry. But so yeah, this topic is dear to my heart, but then it's just the languaging of my kids' upbringing. So for example, I'm trying to just make sure I'm instilling stuff. So in my child's mind, when he heard the word church, 2.5, he thought I'm going to work. But now I'm saying I'm just going to the office. Because already as a 2.5-year-old, he's associating me going to church as me, the earthly father, going away from his son, while church should be connecting to his heavenly father.
Wow, yeah.
So just those little things I'm like realizing.
The fact that you've been aware of that's great.
But
yeah.
it just hurt my heart to think that like, oh, I'm going away and church is the thing that takes me away from him.
Wow, yeah.
So early on, I'm like, okay, we're gonna church is people, church is Sunday. I'm going to the office. I'm going to the office. I'm going to the office. But there's so many like little things like that I'm probably already missing. That are just there because as a pastor, you're like a mini celebrity in your local community without any of the perks. So
some perks.
Some perks.
Mentioned.
Okay, what are the perks? Yeah, like
like I don't want to cut you off.
Go for it. I'm not the expert. I'm just observing.
So I started with, the general, I guess, stereotype is exactly what you said. Good and bad, like either saint or rebel. You're always in the spotlight. Everything's awful. So actually, I decided for my master's to do just an explorative, qualitative.
If this stereotype is true,
just to see what PKs are saying about themselves, right? If the stereotypes stand true, if there's some truth to it, or if maybe it's not all bad, there's some good to it, right?
Yeah.
So I did just the first part of our survey, or my portion of the survey was mainly open-ended question: what did you enjoy about being a PK? What did you dislike about being a PK? And afterwards, we did a thematic analysis of main themes that came up in people's responses, and I was happy to see that people actually did have some good things to say about being a PK too.
Yeah, that's great.
It wasn't all bad, and some of the perks were, this is like a very anecdotal. This isn't a theme that came up, but like, oh, we get a lot of free food.
Yeah.
Because from all the church gatherings, the pastor ends up bringing the food home. But anyway.
Yeah, no, people love to feed pastors.
Right.
That's you have to, I remember giving advice to a young pastor, just, you have to eat food, especially in the Armenian context.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you have to eat food.
That's how you show love.
Yeah. Food is the love language of the Armenian church.
Yeah.
Okay.
But definitely. So there were definitely, I think it was 6 themes that we identified for things PKs enjoyed, and then 7 that they disliked. The things they enjoyed was 1, opportunity. They have a lot of more opportunities.
You have a network, an extended family.
More people. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay.
Even though spotlight was one of the like negative aspects, but recognition and attention
positive
was
aspect
the positive
of it.
aspect of it. Family environment, like the appreciative of the family environment that they grew up in. So they felt like the pastor and the pastor's wife created a good family environment for them. The community they had, automatic community, if you're a PK,
Yeah,
right?
which is
Yeah.
really rare these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Involvement in service. Like if you want to serve, you can because
Right.
you're the PK,
Yeah.
you'll probably be asked to serve. So that was one of them. And then spirituality also, a lot of people said, oh, I can just go to my parents and ask questions. Like if I have questions, I don't have to shy away from them,
That's great.
So those were some of the positives too that stood out. So I wanted to, it was encouraging for me to see too. That it
So
wasn't
would
all
you
bad.
say overall the stereotypes are just people are just focusing on the outliers versus the normative, which
Yeah,
is
that
like the
makes
in between of the same?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it makes sense. Like we focus on the extremes, right?
yeah,
And then expect the PKs to fall within one of those
but
categories.
that's not the reality of
Which-
human people or
Right.
or
And
life in general.
either of those labels can be hurtful
Right.
because if you see them as a rebel, well, self-explanatory. But if you see them as a saint, then they're constantly needing to meet that expectation.
Right.
Oh no, what if I fall short of this,
Right, and that's also a microcosm of the church Christian too. Like
Right.
instead
Oh,
of
yes.
like it's we're sinners saved by grace, and
Right.
we shouldn't have an ego if we're
Right.
acting holy, and
Right.
if we're making a thing about being a religious person, there's usually something off from my experience as a pastor.
Right.
But we're sinners saved by grace, and that
Exactly.
middle ground of the line of good and evil is drawn in between everyone, not just
Absolutely.
between this PK versus that PK or this Christian versus that Christian.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so there was these positive aspects. What were some of the negative attributes?
Yeah,
Now,
so-
the juicy part, like everyone's listening. in,
So, some of the parts that they didn't enjoy, the PKs didn't enjoy much, were again expectations set upon them, so pressure put on them, high standards, high expectations, being forced to be involved. So there's opportunity to get involved, but then there's also being forced to be involved. If you don't do it, who's gonna do it?
Right.
The spotlight, again, it can be exciting.
Double-edged sword, yeah.
Right. It can be exciting. You have recognition, people, more people, but then also you're always under the spotlight. One of the authors I was reading described PKs as living, or pastors' families in general, living in a fishbowl.
Mm-hmm.
That, people are just can look through.
Yeah. Reality television. Yeah.
So, restrictions, it's like sacrifices. So having to sacrifice every single Sunday.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Several days a week. Summers, typically, I don't know, even with my family too. Lately, we've done a better job of once a year making sure we go away for a week. But, just needing to take vacation in between Sunday and Sunday, like going
right.
Monday, Monday to Saturday, going on vacation or things like that. So restrictions and sacrifices made, judgment, criticism, stereotypes, church politics, hypocrisy.
Yeah. And you get I think like one of the main reasons young people don't come to church is because they see that.
Yeah.
But as a kid within that family, you get an insider look to that, and you're like, how could that person say that about my dad, knowing my dad has done this for them?
Yes, and that can be so hurtful. Even some of the responses, because I loved reading each. It was all anonymous, so if you participated, thank you. I appreciate it. I really appreciated everyone who participated, but I didn't know who wrote them.
Yeah.
But some of them wrote like, I hated hearing what some people had to say about my dad.
Right.
I'm sure they see how great their father is, and then because of politics or
or they're just a talking point, and it's weird how people just talk about people.
And then the last one, which you might, I don't know, this was hard for me to see. One of the themes was church over family.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you think about this, like, should a pastor prioritize the church over I don't know what you feel about that, but
I'm strongly will say family first.
Yeah,
because
so,
God, family, church, that order,
Right.
and the number one requirement for an elder in the church is loving your wife and
Right.
raising kids in the faith.
Right.
If that's not the priority, then what's going on? And I'm learning how to lead myself first, then lead my family second, and then lead the church third.
Beautiful.
And if I'm able to do it in that order, then my priorities are set,
Yeah.
and then I'm not have this codependent relationship with how am I perceived by the church.
Yeah.
But to love the church, like that's the theoretical, but then there's the tangible. All right, I'm just gonna wonder what I'm gonna do. Am I gonna go to my son's soccer game on Sunday,
Right.
or I have to go to my work on
Preach.
Sunday?
Right.
You know,
Right.
I'm gonna go preach. So
Right.
so then there's those realities that are more
Right.
the practical,
Right.
and I don't know what that's gonna look like.
Right. Right.
So
So that was one of the
yeah, and I think
aspects. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's difficult because the calling is there. So how do you manage your calling? I think one of the light bulb moments I had in my ministry was I was called to preach 19 after my freshman year. Like God spoke to me and said, "Go preach. This is coming from the Lord. I could justify this as the most important thing I need to accomplish. Go to seminary, get ordained, start preaching." And then I realized that I've tied my identity first as a preacher. The way I would think about myself, the way I would just perceive who I am. This is from God. And then the Lord convicted me. It's like, no, that's what I told you to do. But your primary identity is you're my son. So this notion of trying to kind of form my identity based on my preaching was hindering my preaching because my identity is formed by the message I preach. I am saved because of Jesus Christ dying on the cross for me. So I am who I am because of the message I preach, not because I preach it.
Right.
And then when I was just developing that like counter lie in my soul to just be like, I am saved first, I'm loved first, it made me a freer preacher. So if some old lady at the church, this is a true story, said, "You could barely speak English, you mumble," that devastated me one Sunday. I heard that. Like she said, you're like she really just attacked the way I communicate. And I was destroyed by it like my third year in ministry. I'm like,
yeah, I'm sure.
And it psyched me out where I gave one of my worst messages because she said that right before I started preaching.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm like, what just happened? Because my identity was so tied up with that. But now if someone says that sermon wasn't good, I'm like, yeah, it probably wasn't, but okay. Next one.
Great, yeah.
But I get that. I get that.
Yeah.
So then, okay, so that was your master's?
That was my master's.
And then what was your doctorate?
So yeah, because in the master's I saw one of the themes that kept popping up was expectations, pressure to perform, standards. It's like, okay, perfectionism. Let's dive in. So I looked more closely into family perfectionism among adult pastors' kids.
Okay, and because Armenian families tend to be very, Eastern cultures in general, and I think we fall into that, very shame-based.
Yes.
Perfectionism is ideal. Like when I would get the report card, I'd get straight A's, but I got a B in one class. Instead of celebrating the A's, it'd be like,
"Do not study enough."
Yeah. What's wrong with you? Are you an idiot? I'm like, I suck at chemistry, Dad. What do you want me to do? Anyway, so so perfectionism. How do you define that? And then how do you define the pastor kid's family? Because how much of it is the church culture versus the societal culture or the subculture?
Yeah, great questions. Okay, I'm gonna try to go one by one. If I miss something, let me know. Perfectionism. Okay, so in research, perfectionism used to be viewed as a bad thing.
Very American.
Yes, so like a bad thing. You shouldn't, have all these expectations, can lead to negative outcomes. But over the years, it started changing, and researchers started to identify positive and negative aspects of perfectionism. So the two aspects, the main things that I would want to mention is two parts. The standard, having high standards, which we typically see as part of perfectionism, is, they have high standards, which is actually not the problem. The second part is where it becomes problematic, is what we call discrepancy. And what that means is there's a discrepancy between your set standards and expectations and the performance. So no matter how you perform, you feel like it's never reaching that standard.
It's never going to be good enough.
Never satisfied.
Never good enough.
Never good enough.
But so the standard is okay to have.
Yes.
But then the feeling of it's never good enough
that's what
That's the
leads.
problem.
Yeah. So
Okay.
having high standards has actually been seen in research to have good outcomes. Yeah.
And then it seems like this is like because I'm like a millennial and we had the whole self-esteem. Everyone gets a trophy. There is not the good winner. Everyone's a winner. That's also kind of the negative aspects of perfectionism. Hopefully that's kind of being like, no, it's good to celebrate the one who did the best. Or no, that's self-esteem. It's not related.
Yeah, I don't think I looked into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
essentially, what I see what you're saying. It's good to have good standards.
Right.
Good, like high standards.
But you should also reward those standards.
Correct.
Not like say everyone met the high standard, therefore we reward everyone even though they didn't meet the standard.
Yes. I see what you mean. I think the discrepancy is more looking at the part where even if you are trying or performing at some point, you're like, it's never enough.
So it's like, all right, you got an A, but you need an A plus.
Right. Or let's say if you got a B, but you really tried. The parent, I don't think this is about rewards. The research wasn't about rewards. It's more like, for example, the parent would the parent be able to turn around and would your parent who you got a B in chemistry, let's say, be able to turn around and say, well, you tried your hardest. I'm proud of you. You'll try harder next time, right?
That's positive.
Or something like that. I think that's really positive.
What's the negative of that?
Exactly what you said in the beginning. Like, what? Why didn't you get an A? No matter how hard I tried. Dad, I really tried hard. It doesn't matter. You need the A.
Yeah.
I really tried. I can't go. But that's not good enough. That's
right.
The negative.
That's negative. And what's the data show versus what's the this has nothing to do with pastor kids. This is just in general.
In general,
what is that? What is that? What's the terms again? Just so I don't want to be clinical here. Standard is
discrepancy.
So the discrepancy one. What are some of the negative outcomes of never feeling good enough?
Right.
I mean, I just saying it out loud makes me realize all the shame that could lead to.
It's definitely connected to like depression, anxiety. In my sample too, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, given, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the standards are related with higher achievement, more success, higher self-esteem, things like that. So, it's okay to have good standards. It's okay to have high standards. It's okay to strive towards things. But if you really have tried, being okay with yourself, being proud of yourself, and then also with perfectionism, also there's a different, where is the perfectionism coming from? Is it from the self? Is it from the family? So when we do research, the questionnaires ask like, I feel this, I never feel good enough. So those are personal perfectionism, right? The ones I was looking at, I did do questions about personal perfectionism too, but the ones I'm mainly focusing on is family perfectionism. So the PK's perception of whether their family is adaptive in their perfectionism or maladaptive in their perfectionism, whether they feel like they will ever be good enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did the research show?
Yeah. So I, first and foremost, wanted to try to categorize my PK sample into the 3 perfectionism categories, family perfectionist categories. So there's the adaptive perfectionistic families who are essentially families that the person taking the survey, so the PK in this case, perceives as having high standards for them, but also they're not constantly nagging them about not reaching those standards. Maladaptively perfectionistic families, which are families who have high standards for their kids, but the kids never reaching the standard. It's never good enough, right? And then there's a third category, perfectionistic family groups, where the high standard isn't really there. Like they don't. At all. The kid didn't identify their family as having high expectations of them.
Okay.
So I was very encouraged to see that in our sample, majority of the participants, I had about 207
Wow,
who
that's a
completed the
great
survey.
sample size.
Yeah,
Okay.
who completed the survey. Um, who majority of them actually identified their families as adaptively perfectionistic families. So I was really happy to see that. The smallest group was actually maladaptively perfectionistic families. So it went from adaptive, non-perfectionistic, and then maladaptively perfectionistic families. So I was happy to see that. In my sample, I also did, it was confirmed that within my sample, depression, stress, and I think life satisfaction. I had a bunch of variables, but I think those three ended up being um, significantly. There are significant differences with maladaptively perfectionistic families. So essentially, kids who identified their families as maladaptively perfectionistic ended up scoring high on the depression scale, on the stress scale, and had low life satisfaction.
So there's this high correlation with that sense. And like I think like I'm not an expert on any of this by any means, but like attachment theory is like, is my family love me enough versus you're not very good enough. So there's some there. But this is not just for pastors' families. This is for all types of families, right? It's just the degree of it is just different.
Yeah, so the reason I think what I'd want to do with this, which I would need additional data for, but what I would really want to know is if, let's say, if there's high congregational expectations, right? If if you're in the spotlight and the congregation always expects a lot of you, will the family being adaptively perfectionist, will that be able to kind of soften the blow a little bit? I'm curious if the family can play a role in like helping the PK not feel as negatively impacted by the congregational expectation, right? So if I were to continue, I'd want to find a scale that I can assess congregational expectations.
I think this is important for the church family. Like we should have a high standard of let's follow Christ, let's do this, let's do what he does, let's practice what he preaches, but also remind ourselves of the grace along the journey to get there. So it's cool to hear that there's this shift in the perfectionism not being a negative thing. And it goes with like the Protestant work ethic. There was traces of this historically, but as long as it's like truth and grace, it can't be just truth, no grace.
Right.
Then it the maladaptive. So all right, let's just practically give me some help here. I'm raising two young boys. What are some suggestions you have for me to raise my sons? What do you think?
I'll be honest. First and foremost, the fact that you're already starting to notice the little things of like, my kid thinks, church equals work, takes my dad away. Those are great things. Like, as you noticed, some pastors' kids said, my dad's always at church. And, so making sure you do give time to your family as well. And starting to recognize, maybe check in with your kids, how they're feeling about things. If you have to make a big decision, I know that your kids are still really young, but if they grow a little bit, involving them in decision making. I know some PKs commented on moving a lot, so maybe involving them in that conversation of, okay, I'm being called to ministry here or there. Let's talk about it, and also just straightforward from my research, from perfectionism research in general. Yeah, just make sure you're not, even if there are expectations coming from the community, try to remind your kids that it's okay to not be perfect and it's normal to not be perfect. It's actually unhealthy to think that as a human.
Isn't that like narcissism? Like if you think you're perfect, like that's like the definition of
right. So trying to help them be okay with their humanness, to accept grace within themselves as well. One thing that I'm just remembering, random, this was like 5-6 years ago that I read every single response, but I'm remembering some of them clearly. A a couple of them had mentioned, even if congregation, members of the congregation have turned around and said stuff to me, my mom and dad have stood up for me.
Yeah.
And that was impactful for them.
Right. Because they're father first, pastor second, or mother. Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's an important distinction.
So, yeah. And then maybe if in terms of like involvement and expectations of involvement, great, encourage them, give them opportunities, but also not make them feel forced.
Yeah, no one wants the force to be.
And the pressure of, you're my son, you have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, so these principles also apply for non-pastor families too.
Absolutely.
It's just there's more of that spotlight aspect we were talking about.
Because I think some of it does come naturally. I don't know about other PKs, but I put that pressure on myself sometimes.
The internal
pressure. I should do it. Like, my mom needs help, I should go help. Or like my dad, even though I know they'll understand.
That's you doing it to yourself.
Yeah, like my parents have been okay with me, doing or not doing whatever I want in the, serving wise. Or if I wanted to explore a different church at some point, go for it,
Yeah.
But I felt that expectation of like, is that okay? Well, what will it be seen as? Am I putting them,
So what helps
them
you?
down.
What helps? Because I feel like a lot of people struggle with this. They're their own worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
They have these high standards and they're worried about what other people are thinking. So what are some tools you think that could help people show more grace for themselves?
Yeah. I think one, being reminded of that. Two, I think parents can actually be good examples of that. So if you as a parent want to model that for your kid, of, you know what, it's okay, like, daddy can't do that right now, like, or I think I need to take care of this other thing, so I'm gonna have to say no to that. So as a parent, being able to model that. For me personally, okay, let's think. I think, my parents played a huge role in the reminders that they gave me. Unfortunately, I think on one hand, it took burnout for me to actually understand that concept of like, I need to set limits for myself.
Yeah.
Or that it's okay to not do everything. So I think that's not a very healthy
No,
answer.
but sometimes it does require us to be at a low point to start realizing, okay, I got to change my mindset, or
I'm human. I need to allow myself to be human.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm trying to think clinically what I would say, personally what I would say, as a PK what I would say.
Yeah.
Those are some of my answers, I think. As just a plug for therapy if you ever want to. So therapy's also great. Like, if you feel like you're really struggling with some of those.
So let's end on this note. You've been doing a great job. I've learned a tremendous amount. Certain ethnic cultures, Armenian culture specifically, there is a lot of poo-pooing therapy.
Mm-hmm.
How can we break that without it being like, I'm just going to complain about my parents and I'm just going to waste money?
Yeah.
What are some ways that we could destroy the stigma of just saying, I'm going to go see a therapist?
Yeah. That's one of my passions. Actually, I hope to, play a role in that. Not only Armenian community, but Christian Armenian community. I think a lot of, I do believe that Jesus Christ can heal me. And I do believe that I go to him with prayer, but also therapy can be helpful in helping you, sit down and be honest with yourself, honest with someone else, try to process through things that maybe you'll be too afraid to tell your parents because of the expectations set on yourself, or because of the shame, guilt culture in the church. So I think I'm happy to say that recently I'm hearing more and more parents advocating for their kids, saying, okay, I think my kid needs therapy. People will reach out to me saying, hey, where can I find a therapist who blah, 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 blah. So I'm happy to see that. But I think main way that we can break that stigma would be honest conversations. What you're doing right now would be I would love to, share about, therapy, resources, things like that at different churches if people want to hear about it. Armenian communities. I know there's Armenian mental health organizations who are trying to do that too, trying to break the stigma, trying to bring awareness, trying to talk about what therapy is. Like, it doesn't have to be this big bad wolf.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, I think more awareness, more information about it.
Yeah.
I think with anything, breaking any kind of stigma, conversation and relationships is the best way, I think. Um, Sit down with someone who has gone to therapy.
Yeah.
Sit down with someone who is a therapist and talk to them about what therapy is,
Yeah, and then just making sure you find the right therapist.
Exactly.
Like yeah, not all therapists will be the same.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. It's okay to try, and then if it doesn't work,
Yeah.
try someone else.
Or like if there's no, or like I kind of like don't like the fact that sometimes you like in New York City, like every other person has a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of talk about their therapist like they're their pastor. And
Mm-hmm.
what are your but like
Yeah.
what's bothering me with some of that, like I'm for therapy, but sometimes they're like this weird relationship. They're telling their therapist something, but they're not even telling their like spouse.
Right.
Or like there's like you don't want to always hear, unless there's like some specific mental health thing, but like you don't want to have a lifelong relationship with a therapist.
Right.
Isn't the whole goal to like overcome certain patterns so you could break away?
So it all in the therapy. It's like there's denominations in the therapy
Okay.
world too, and there's different views on it. The way I see it, the way in my practice, our goal is to get you to a point where you can be functional enough to go and use the tools on your own.
Right.
And get you plugged back into your community, plugged back into
Right.
your family to be able to do the things that we've taught you. We give you the tools. We help you in the beginning when you can't do it on your own. But the hope is that you will get to a place where you'll be able to kind of spread your wings and fly.
Your self-awareness was there. You're able to tackle the roots.
Right.
You're able to incorporate discoveries of Western medicine, brain chemistry. You experience a transformation.
Mind, behavior, all that. Yeah. So
and then wonderful. Yeah.
And then of course, if 2 years down the line you're still struggling, welcome back. We'll talk about it, some more. And then, so I do think my hope is, you asked about pastors. My hope is that a good therapist would make sure to encourage the patients to still stay rooted and connected with their religious community.
Yeah.
If need be, even getting in touch with the pastors or ministers or, other religious leaders to see, okay, how can I be sensitive to this person's religion? How can I do therapy in a way that doesn't completely disregard their religion, doesn't completely go against their religion. That's one thing I loved about Fuller, is we put that out in the front. Like, we know that spirituality is a huge part of human experience, and it can have very positive impacts in people's lives.
Of course, yeah.
So I hope a good therapist wouldn't completely disregard that and take that away.
Right. And I think there's the beautiful thing of creating the self-awareness about what's going on in our souls and our minds. And then once you have that, then you could see the Christian principles being applied to that, and then life change take place.
Right.
But then there's definitely, it's just interesting. There's like, just like anything, there's different schools of thoughts, different practices or denominations within the therapy world.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so many.
Yeah, but maybe some negative experience could also, again, like people do this with church. There's that one church that's awful, or that one PK that's awful.
Right.
So they stereotype all PKs or all churches or all therapy.
Right.
But that's just, there's going to be bad apples in every industry, every community. But the goal is to just see it for its beauty of helping people.
Right. And knowing that you're not alone. I think this is something maybe in the church also. If someone struggles with mental health challenges, they might feel alone. Or something I've really been heartbroken by is, as a therapist, when I've sat with Christian clients who, on top of feeling depressed and anxious, they feel guilty or shameful for feeling depressed and anxious because they feel they're not good enough Christian.
Yeah.
So I hope Christians and people just know they're not alone in what they're feeling, what they're going through.
Yeah.
And
that's a great point.
it doesn't have to mean you're a bad Christian. And I hope we can lean on God, but then also seek out the help you need.
Right.
That will hopefully help you,
And it's just like
closer
they have these
to God.
negative feelings, and because of the shame, they're stuffing those feelings down versus.
Right, it's just making the
It's just a
depression
spiral,
worse. It's just
spirals.
it's just so
And
heartbreaking.
it goes back to the whole research. Oh, I'm not good enough.
Good enough. Right.
Not
Oh my
good enough.
gosh.
Not good
Perfectionism
enough.
and Christianity just in general, like like you said, it's not just a PK thing also.
This is great.
That's Christian.
Great insights, because this is also, I'm also now seeing this research and seeing it as like how to apply it to the greater church.
Yeah.
And it's comforting to know that having a high standard, it's a good thing. But and Jesus sets the standard very high, but he gives us the grace to get there. And from my personal experience doing ministry, when I talk about sin and doing not meeting that standard, oftentimes you get accused of guilting and shaming people. But on the other side of that guilt and shame, if you bring it to Christ, there's actually the freedom, the love, the grace. So it's like I talk about these things not because I want to guilt and shame people, because I want to free them from it, because Christ died for it to free you from it. And it's just cool to see when people really feel forgiven, really feel comfortable in their own skin, really feel that, okay, I'm not perfect, but I am loved perfectly by a perfect God who loves me and gave his life for me.
Yeah.
So these are just really good insights, and thank you. This was more optimistic than I thought. So I'm excited to raise my kids and not worry about it. I could set the standard high, like a good Armenian dad, but I'll make sure that
encourage them.
I'll just encourage them along the way.
And if they fall short, that's okay.
Just pick them back up. Yeah.
Pick them, walk alongside them. Be with them, support them through their downfalls, and then help them look towards the standards again.
That's great. Thank you so much, Doctor. And it's so great to have this conversation.
It was so fun.
You crushed it. This is your first podcast. You didn't have to be perfect. It was.
I know. Definitely came in with standard and expectations for myself.
Yeah.
So thanks so much. No, this was fun. You made it fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching the Christ and Coffee podcast. Please like, subscribe, comment below, share this podcast, and tune in next week. Thank you so much. God bless. Have a great week.